Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot onto the deck of a creaking Polynesian voyaging canoe. A vaca, her sky so crowded with stars, it feels like someone just tipped over a jar of glitter onto black silk. The air tastes faintly of salt and something woody from the lashings holding the hull together. You're not sure whether you're thrilled or slightly nauseous, but you are sure that you are a long way from your couch. Somewhere between your toes and the deep, dark water is a slab of carved timber that will carry you across hundreds, maybe thousands of miles without GPS, without a compass, and without any guarantee that your hair will still be looking decent at the other end. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there, so post that in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The canoe sways gently, but your brain keeps whispering. We are in the middle of nowhere. It's not a bad nowhere, exactly. More like the kind of nowhere where the horizon is perfectly round and the stars actually seem to tilt as the hull rocks. Your guide, the navigator, squats by the stern, not looking at you, but looking through you, past you, into the night. His face is calm in a way that makes you think he might actually be part of the boat. Every line of his body is tuned to the sea's motion, as if the hull, his skin, and the water are all one continuous surface. The air smells of coconut fiber rope, dried pandanus leaves woven into mats, and a hint of fermented breadfruit from the storage compartment. You've read that these double-hulled canoes, vaca, waka, depending on the island, are as much family members as vehicles. They are built with ceremony, named and remembered. Losing one isn't just losing transport. It's like losing a cousin who made really good taro pudding. Somewhere in the darkness, a small wave slaps the side with a sound like someone patting a sleeping dog. You hear the navigator hum under his breath, a low, steady tone that matches the boat's rhythm. It's not a song for you, it's a song for the sea, or maybe for himself. Historians still argue whether these chants carried coded navigational cues or were simply ways to pass the endless hours. Either way, the effect is the same. Your pulse begins to sync with it. You catch the first joke of the night when one of the crew hands you a paddle and says, "Don't drop it. The sharks already have enough toys." You try to laugh it off, but you hold on to that paddle like it's your only lifeline, which, in a way, it might be. Above you, the Milky Way looks less like a galaxy and more like someone smeared milk across the firmament. It's shockingly bright out here, with no city lights to dull it. Can see layers, bright points, dimmer points, even faint cloudy clusters. It's both gorgeous and a little unnerving, like you're looking into the ocean's mirror, and it's staring back. The navigator's eyes flick to a patch of stars just off the bow. You don't know it yet, but those points will be your highway for the night. The deck creaks under your weight as you shuffle closer to the side. You half expect to see glowing monsters under the surface. Instead, there's a trail of shimmering green sparks, phosphorescence, streaming from the hull. Every tiny bump of the boat disturbs plankton that flash for an instant, turning your wake into a comet's tail. You think about how the ancient navigators had these lights as companions long before anyone thought of neon signs. One crew member passes by, balancing a woven tray of dried fish. The smell makes you suddenly aware that you haven't eaten since you left the shore. He grins and says, in a mix of Polynesian and teasing English, "Eat now. Later, maybe storm." You're not sure if he's warning you or just testing your sense of humor. You take a piece anyway, salty, chewy, oddly comforting. Somewhere in the night, a splash, then another. Flying fish, startled by the canoe's silent glide, arc out of the water and slap back down with a sound that makes you flinch until you get used to it. In the dark, the navigator's hum shifts slightly, as if acknowledging them. He doesn't look surprised. Nothing seems to surprise him. By now, the shore lights have faded completely. If you turn in a slow circle, you'll see nothing but darkness, except for the stars and the faint white glow where waves break gently against the canoe's twin hulls. The air cools slightly, and you pull your cloak tighter. This is it. No going back to shore for a sweater. Out here, you're part of the voyage, whether you're ready or not. The navigator finally glances at you, his eyes catching the starlight like tiny lanterns. He doesn't smile, exactly, but there's something like reassurance in his face. You think about what it means to trust someone who can steer across the Pacific without a compass, guided only by the sea and sky. You realize you're in the presence of an art that might not be fully understood even by those who study it for a living. And for a moment, standing there, the creak of the wood beneath you and the soft hiss of the sea alongside, you forget your nervousness. The stars feel closer. The sea feels less like an obstacle and more like a road waiting to be read. The vaca sighs as a wave passes under it, and you realize you've just taken your first step, or maybe your first float, into the map that is the ocean. The first thing you notice as you settle into the long rhythm of the voyage is that the canoe doesn't actually move the way you thought it would. You were expecting something like a bus ride on water, a constant forward push, the bows slicing cleanly through the waves. But no, it's more of a negotiation, a conversation between wood and water. The hull tilts slightly, rides up, slides down. The lashings groan. The sails sigh in and out like a giant's lungs. And through all of it, the navigator keeps his gaze not fixed ahead, but angled toward the horizon, where the sky begins to merge with the sea. The wind tonight is soft and steady, and the sailcloth, made from woven pandanus leaves, holds its shape like a sleeping bat's wing. Cute, run your fingers over the fibers and wonder how something so light could carry so much weight. The navigator adjusts the sheet ropes without looking, hands moving as if they've done it 1,000 times in the dark, which they probably have. Historians still argue whether early Polynesian voyages relied more on sail or paddle power, but watching this crew, you suspect it was always a blend, tailored to the mood of the sea. Your attention shifts downward to the surface itself. First glance, it's just dark water, but when you squint, you see texture, tiny ripples traveling in neat, almost parallel lines. The navigator crouches and dips his fingers into the water, then gestures in a slow sweep, murmuring something you don't understand. One of the younger crew translates. He feels the swell from far island. You tilt your head and realize the ripples are actually intersecting in a subtle crosshatch pattern. You'd never have noticed if someone hadn't pointed it out. These swells, generated by distant storms and refracted around islands you can't even see yet, are part of the invisible map your navigator reads. It's oddly intimate, the thought that he can feel an island hundreds of miles away just by the pattern of the water under his canoe. You try dipping your hand over the side, but all you get is cold fingers and a splash up your sleeve. Apparently, the sea doesn't reveal its secrets to tourists on the first try. One of the crew chuckles at your attempt and offers a story. Once, he says, navigator fell asleep, but canoe still found island. You raise an eyebrow, skeptical, but he insists, 'cause he set her on the swell path. She knows. You're not sure whether she is the canoe or the sea, but you decide not to ask. Sometimes magic is better left unexplained. The night grows quieter. Even the wind seems to hush so the stars can speak. You lean back and try to follow the navigator's gaze. He's watching a small cluster of stars just above the horizon. To you, they look like random glitter. To him, they're the prow of the great celestial canoe leading the way. Historians still debate the exact star paths ancient navigators used, Some say they memorize dozens of rising and setting points for every major star. Others believe they learn to read the whole sky as a shifting dome. Here, theory becomes reality. The navigator tilts his head ever so slightly as one of the stars brushes the horizon line. It's like watching someone check a clock only they can see. The canoe rides a larger swell now, and you feel the deck drop beneath your feet for a heartbeat before rising again. The motion is soothing, like being rocked in a giant cradle, until you remember the cradle is floating over several thousand feet of black water. The navigator senses your unease and finally offers a rare comment in your direction. This wave? Same wave from last night. You stare at him, trying to parse the impossibility. He nods, amused. She travels far. A faint glow appears. Ahead. Not land. Not yet. Right. It's the moon, climbing slowly from the water's edge. Its light spills across the swells, flattening the shadows and making the ripples easier to see. The navigator uses this moment to point out the main swell direction. Okay? Long rolling rhythm from the east and the smaller, choppier wind waves from the southeast. You begin to realize that the ocean is not one surface, but many, layered and braided like hair. The canoe chooses which strands to follow. Someone passes you a calabash of fresh water. The gourd surface is cool against your palms, and you take a careful sip. The navigator doesn't drink yet. His attention is still on the sea. You imagine his mind layering wind, wave, and starlight into a single image. Something like a map and something like a memory. The thought makes you feel both small and honored. Small because you could never learn all this in a lifetime. Honored because, for tonight, you're part of the voyage. The crew settles into a quiet work rhythm, checking lashings, trimming the sail, scanning the horizon. One hums an old chant under his breath, not quite a melody, more like a repetition of vowel sounds that blend into the creak of the hull. You're reminded of the story about navigators singing to the beans in fermentation jars, except here, the song seems aimed at keeping the canoe in harmony with the swells. You lean over the side again and notice that the phosphorescent trail from earlier has faded. The moonlight drowns out the glow, replacing it with a silver shimmer that follows each ripple. A flying fish breaks the surface and sails across the path of the moon, its shadow flickering against the bright water before it vanishes with a splash. The navigator finally shifts his posture, easing back slightly, satisfied with the course. He closes his eyes for a moment, still swaying with the motion of the hull. You realize he could probably do this in complete darkness. In fact, he probably has. The air is cooler now, tinged with the scent of open ocean, clean, salt-heavy, a little metallic. The crew tucks themselves into more compact shapes, conserving warmth. You pull your cloak tighter and settle in, your body slowly matching the canoe's rhythm. You don't think about time anymore. You just ride the swell. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you start to understand what the navigator meant when he called the swell from last night the same wave. The sea carries memories, and the canoe is how you ride them. For now, that's all the map you need. By the time the first thread of dawn loosens itself from the horizon, the air has shifted again. It's not warmer. In fact, the breeze is a touch cooler, but it carries the faint, unmistakable scent of land. You can't place it at first. It's not as though the ocean suddenly smells like a fruit stand. It's subtler, like a ghost of soil and greenery weaving itself through the salt. You take a deep breath, and the navigator, without looking at you, murmurs, "Land, wind." It's one of those moments when you feel as though you're cheating. You could never have detected it on your own, but now that he said it, you can't unsmell it. Historians still argue whether ancient navigators actually relied on the scent of land for direction, or whether it was more of a confirmation, a quiet nod from nature saying, "Yes, you're on the right path. It's out here with a thin, silver light, peeling open the sky. It's hard not to believe it's real. The canoe moves differently now. The swells are a little more chaotic, the undercurrents colliding as if confused about which direction to favor. You imagine this is what the sea feels like when it has to decide whether it belongs to land or open water. The navigator adjusts the steering paddle with the small flick of his wrist. The whole craft responds as if it's been waiting for the cue. A faint streak of white arcs across the dimming stars. A seabird. Its long wings slice the air. Steady, purposeful. First messenger, one of the crew calls softly. The bird is heading inland, and the navigator's gaze follows it with the same intensity he gave the stars last night. Seabirds become living compasses at this stage of the voyage. Certain species, natives, terns, frigate birds, have daily feeding patterns that make them easy to read if you know what you're looking for. Historians still debate exactly how much Polynesian navigators relied on birds versus swells, but you suspect the answer is the same as with everything out here. A little of everything. Always in motion, the crew starts scanning the sky more actively. Now, another bird appears, then two more, each one stitching an invisible thread between you and the land you still can't see. The birds aren't in a rush. They glide with an unhurried confidence, dipping now and then to skim the surface before climbing again. Watching them is hypnotic, like tracking leaves drifting in a slow current dot. Then you hear it, a faint change in the sound of the sea. It's not louder, exactly, but there's a deeper tone underneath the hiss of the water against the hull. You try to focus on it, and for a moment it's just out of reach, like trying to catch a whisper in a busy room. The navigator catches your expression and nods toward the horizon. Reef song, he says simply. You have no idea how far away this reef might be, but apparently it's close enough for the waves to begin their low percussion on the coral. You squint toward the horizon, but it's still nothing but shifting blue and a faint blur of clouds. The clouds, you realize, are another clue. They're thicker, wider, more billowy than the long, flat streaks you've been seeing for days. The navigator points with his chin. Land cloud, he explains. Okay. These clouds form when warm air rises off the land, cooling as it climbs, spilling into puffs that hover above their birthplace like guardians. You feel like you're being let in on a series of secret handshakes. The ocean shares only with those patient enough to watch. One of the younger crew members leans over the side with a woven scoop net and hauls up a tangle of floating seaweed. He grins as if he's just produced a winning lottery ticket. The navigator takes a glance, nods, and lets it drop back into the water. You learn that certain seaweeds grow near reefs and drift outward with the currents, their appearance another soft confirmation that you're closing in on land. You're beginning to realize that none of these signs work alone. Any one of them, the smell of earth, the birds, the reef song, the clouds, the seaweed, could mislead you. Get together, they braid into a certainty that's stronger than any single clue. It's like reading a book in which each word means little alone, but together they form a clear sentence. Land is near. Sky brightens further, turning the ocean into molten pewter streaked with gold. The crew stirs from their night's quiet vigilance into a more talkative energy. Someone starts humming again, this time a tune with a little more bounce, like a morning song to coax the day into full wakefulness. You can't help but smile, even here. After nights on the open ocean, there's still a mood shift when the promise of land is in the air. The navigator finally steps to the bow, squinting toward the east where the sky is now full of gold light. You follow his gaze, and for a heartbeat you think you see something, a faint smudge on the horizon. But it wavers, and you tell yourself it could be just another trick of the light. Then the smell of land hits you again, sharper now with a damp vegetal richness that no amount of salt can hide. You breathe in deeply, trying to memorize it. This is the scent of arrival, the opposite of the open ocean temps that has filled your lungs for days. The canoe shifts course slightly, the sail catching a fuller breath of wind. The swells beneath. You feel more playful, tossing the hull side to side in a way that makes you widen your stance. A splash of spray catches you across the face, cool and briny, and you realize you're grinning. You're not even sure why. It's not your land, not your homecoming, but there's something contagious about the way the crew moves now. It's their quiet confidence, sharpening into anticipation. Somewhere behind you, the sun breaks free of the horizon, spilling light across the water, so bright you have to shield your eyes. And there it is. No trick of the light this time. A darker green line etched against the gold sky, growing slowly, steadily clearer. Land. The navigator doesn't cheer, doesn't even smile widely. He just nods once, satisfied, as if the sea has delivered on a promise it made long before you stepped aboard. The first sight of land doesn't change the rhythm of the canoe as much as you expect. It still slides forward with the same patient stroke of paddle and the same careful trim of sail. But there's a current in the air now, not the salty breeze you've grown used to, but something more like anticipation, woven through every movement of the crew. The navigator moves to the bow again, his bare feet gripping the smooth wood as though the canoe itself is an extension of his body. He squints into the horizon, scanning not for the broad smear of green you can now clearly see, but for something smaller, more telling, the break in the reef. You don't see it yet, but then again, you're still learning the language of the sea. That this close to shore, the ocean starts speaking in a faster rhythm. The swells shorten, the watercolor shifts from endless deep cobalt to bands of lighter blue and turquoise. Historians still argue whether ancient Polynesian navigators deliberately sought specific reef channels or simply knew the coastline well enough to avoid disaster by instinct. Here, you're watching someone thread a needle in motion, the canoe dancing just slightly underfoot as he makes micro adjustments with the steering paddle. A seabird skims low across the water ahead, then banks toward shore. The navigator follows its arc and murmurs to himself. You suspect it's less about the bird itself now and more about using it as a moving marker, a point of reference against the shifting shoreline. The air thickens with the scent of vegetation, sharp, resinous notes of coastal shrubs, a sweetness from flowering trees. It's almost dizzying after the long austerity of open sea air. One of the crew dips his hands into the water and lets the brine run down his forearms, as if rinsing off the last traces of the voyage before making landfall. Then you hear it, the sudden, hollow boom of waves breaking against coral. It's a deep sound resonating in your ribs, followed by a soft hiss as the foam pulls back. It comes in intervals, like the ocean breathing slowly. The sound grows louder as you near, and the navigator's gaze never leaves that invisible point in the reef you still can't see. A few minutes later, he gestures toward what looks to you like nothing more than a shift in the white spray, a place where the waves seem to fold differently. Passage, he says, and suddenly you see it, the break in a reef where the waves roll inward instead of crashing outward. That's your doorway. The crew springs into a quiet flurry of activity, adjusting the sail, readying the paddles. No one shouts. The instructions are short, almost murmured. You get the feeling this moment, entering through the reef, is both utterly routine and sacred in its own way. A wrong move here could splinter the canoe in seconds, but done right, it's a glide into safety. The bow tips toward the passage, and the sea responds with a sudden change in texture. The swells ease, replaced by a smoother, glacier surface. The canoe glides between two curtains of foaming water. The reefs roar to either side, like applause held just out of reach, and then you're inside. The lagoon opens around you, a vast bowl of stillness painted in impossible blues. Small fish dart just beneath the surface, their scales flashing in the morning light. The water here is warm, almost silky, and it reflects the sky in a way that makes it feel like you're floating in the air itself. Ahead, the shoreline is no longer a smudge of green, but a layered tapestry. Pale sand, low dunes tangled with creeping vines, then the taller ranks of coconut palms swaying in the breeze. Beyond them, you glimpse darker jungle where the canopy knits together, holding its secrets. The crew's energy shifts again. The urgency of navigation melts into something slower, almost ceremonial. One man hums under his breath. Another ties his hair back with a strip of cloth. The navigator, for the first time since you've met him, allows a small smile. Historians still debate whether arriving voyagers in the ancient Pacific performed formal rituals before setting foot ashore, but it's easy to imagine why they might. This isn't just the end of a trip, it's the closing of a circuit between sea and land, the completion of a conversation with the ocean. The canoe drifts the last stretch toward a narrow curve of beach. You can see the ripple of shallows ahead, where the water thins to ankle-deep clarity. Tiny crabs skitter sideways in the sand. One of the crew stands and steps lightly overboard, guiding the canoe forward with both hands on the bow. The hull grates softly against sand, and the motion stops. For a heartbeat, no one moves. The navigator stands tall at the bow, looking inland as though reacquainting himself with an old friend. Then, without ceremony, he steps onto the beach. You follow, your feet sinking into the warm, damp sand. Breeze here feels different, gentler, scented with flowers and faint wood smoke. You realize that the sound of the reef is now behind you, its roar muffled by distance and the embrace of land. The crew begins unloading supplies, bundles of woven mats, baskets of dried fish, gourds of fresh water. They work without hurry, talking softly, as if easing themselves back into the slower pulse of life ashore. And you, standing there with your toes curling into the sand, understand, in some small way, the navigator's calm. The ocean isn't an enemy to be conquered or a void to be crossed. It's a partner in a long dance. Okay, and here, at this quiet edge of the land, you've just learned one step. The land greets you with a deep, living stillness, but it's not the silence of emptiness. It's the hum of a place breathing under the sun, layered in sound if you listen closely enough. The faint rustle of palm fronds overhead, the hiss and sigh of the reef behind you. Somewhere further inland, the hollow thump of a breadfruit falling to the ground. And beneath it all, the soft hum of insects, their rhythms weaving into the steady heat of the afternoon. The navigator moves inland first, taking the path just above the high tide line where the sand is firm underfoot. You follow him into the fringe of the coastal grove, where coconut palms stand like thin-shouldered sentinels. The air shifts instantly cooler, shaded with a sweet dryness that smells faintly of sun-warmed husks and salt. You reach out and touch one of the trunks. It's smooth in places, fibrous in others, the growth rings hidden under a skin that feels almost like the ribs of a worn sail. Historians still argue, whether ancient voyagers chose landfalls for their abundance of food and water or for their strategic protection from storms. Here, you see both at once. Shallow stream threads through the grove, its water so clear you can see each pebble at the bottom. Small birds flit from branch to branch, their calls quick and bright. The navigator kneels beside the stream, cups his hands, and drinks without hesitation. You copy him, the water cool and shockingly sweet on your tongue. Not far from the stream, the crew begins the familiar work of making a temporary camp. Bundles of pandanus leaves are untied, mats unrolled on a smooth patch of ground. One man wedges a sharpened stick into the sand and begins prying loose young coconuts. Another gathers driftwood for the evening fire. You notice the calm in their movements. No rush, no barked orders. Just the rhythm of tasks they've done countless times before. A little further up the beach, the navigator pauses to scan the horizon again. This time, he's looking seaward, tracing the shape of the reef and the curve of the lagoon. You can almost see the mental chart in his mind, the way he's already thinking ahead to the next voyage. For him, land is not the end of the story. It's just one chapter. A sudden flicker of movement catches your eye. A green turtle, slow and deliberate, pulling itself up the wet sand. Its flippers sweep arcs behind it, marking the beach with deep, clean trails. The navigator watches it for a moment, then says something quietly in his language. You don't catch the words, but the tone is gentle, almost reverent. In many Pacific traditions, turtles are messengers between worlds, sea and land, past and future. You help gather palm fronds for shade. The fronds, taller than you, and fragrant with that green, peppery smell of living leaves. They're woven into a quick lean-to shelter, angled against the prevailing wind. Inside, the air is softer, the light mottled. Someone lays out a length of tablecloth along the sand. Its bark fiber weaves surprisingly smooth under your hand. It will serve as both bedding and table. The fire is lit with dry coconut husk, the fibers flaring up in a puff of sweet smoke before settling into a steady crackle. A clay pot appears from one of the supply bundles. How they carried it across the open ocean without breaking it is a mystery in itself. Seaweed-wrapped parcels are set by the fire to warm. The scent of fish and taro beginning to drift on the breeze. Historians still debate whether early Polynesian landfall feasts were formalized rituals or simply practical meals of whatever was at hand. Either way, the effect is the same, an easing of bodies into the rhythm of the new place, a grounding after the long sway of the sea. The navigator sits cross-legged beside the fire, running his fingers over a small, carved object. You recognize it from the voyage, a stick chart, the lattice of thin rods and shells that maps the swells and currents. Now, ashore, he smooths one of the splinters, murmuring as if to himself. You realize he's adjusting it, marking something learned from the passage you just made. Landfall isn't just about arrival. It's also about remembering the way. The food is shared without ceremony, but with a quiet generosity that feels ceremonial in its own way. Warm fish wrapped in leaves, tender slices of breadfruit roasted until the edges caramelize, coconut water drunk straight from the shell. You eat slowly, each bite tasting sharper after the salt and wind of the voyage. As the sun angles lower, the lagoon glows like liquid gold. You wander down to the water's edge, where tiny schools of fish shift in shimmering patterns. The reef's roar softens with the tide, replaced by the gentle shush of ripples against the sand. You can see now how the ocean wraps around this island like a protective arm. When you return to camp, the navigator is telling a quiet story to one of the younger crew. Something about a storm years ago and a night spent clinging to a drifting log. His tone is calm, not dramatic. In his world, such stories aren't for thrilling an audience, but for passing along the lessons that keep people alive. Night begins to lean in from the east, the first stars appearing faintly above the black silhouette of the palms. You help stoke the fire, its orange glow catching in the navigator's eyes as he studies the sky once more. Even on land, his gaze is always turned toward the sea, toward the currents of wind and cloud that will one day pull him back into the great map he carries in his mind. You feel it too, the pull. The island is beautiful, fragrant, generous. The ocean is still there, breathing just beyond the reef. You're beginning to understand. For a Polynesian navigator, landfall is not an ending. It's a pause, a note held gently in the long song of the voyage. Dawn doesn't so much break here as it seeps in the dark sky, loosening into blue, the sea trading its silver calm for a soft, glittering ripple. You wake to the muted rush of the tide, pulling at the reef, and the faint click-click of someone prying open a shell. The camp is still, but not asleep. There's a low murmur near the fire where the navigator sits, already awake, his gaze fixed not on the island, but on the horizon. He's waiting for the sky to tell him its morning story. You join him, settling into the cool sand, still stamped with last night's footprints. The eastern horizon is brushed with a pale orange light. Overhead, the last few stars cling to the fading night, their reflections faint in the glassy surface of the lagoon. The navigator tilts his head ever so slightly, following some unseen alignment. His eyes trace the angle between the rising sun and a particular cluster of stars, now disappearing into daylight. Historians still argue whether the star compass was memorized in rigid geometric divisions or absorbed as a looser, more poetic web of relationships. Watching him now, you suspect it's both. His mind holds a precision. You can feel distances, bearings, the timing of star rise and star set, but there's also a kind of storytelling in his focus. It's as if each point of light carries a tale. That makes it unforgettable. He reaches for a smooth stick in the sand and begins sketching. At first, it looks like a random scattering of lines radiating from a point. But slowly, the picture emerges. The horizon ring, divided into named houses where stars rise and set. He murmurs the names under his breath, the syllables rolling like small waves. Some sound like they've been worn smooth by centuries. Others carry sharp edges, like stones that still remember the quarry. You try to fix them in your memory, repeating them quietly after him. He nods, once, not in praise, but in acknowledgement, a navigator's way of saying you've just stepped onto the first rung of a very long ladder. The stick compass isn't for show, it's a rehearsal, a way of keeping the mental map alive, even while the canoe rests on shore. The crew begins to stir now, drawn to the fire's warmth and the faint smell of roasting fish from a small stone hearth. One man hands you a cup made from half a coconut shell. Inside is a milky, slightly sweet drink, coconut mixed with warm water and the faintest trace of mashed breadfruit. It's breakfast, but also hydration for the day ahead. Today isn't for sailing. Today is for gathering. A navigator may live for the open sea, but the crew's survival depends on the resources of each landfall. The navigator leads you inland again, this time past the stream you drank from yesterday. The path thickens into low forest, the air damp and perfumed with a mix of wild ginger and damp earth. Sunlight breaks through in coins of gold, flashing on the glossy leaves. Here, the navigator teaches another map, one that isn't drawn in stars or swells, but in the seasonal cycles of plants and the calls of birds. He points out a tree heavy with oval fruit, their green skins beginning to blush yellow. Breadfruit. Its season here is almost ready to peak, which means the rains are coming soon. He gestures toward a vine creeping along the ground. It's small, purple flowers nodding like tiny bells. Medicinal, he says, good for easing a sailor's cough after many nights in damp air. Historians still debate whether early voyagers deliberately carried plants and seeds to new islands or simply stumbled into cultivating them along the way. But the navigator's attention suggests there's nothing accidental about it. He knows which plants will feed the crew in weeks to come, which leaves can be twisted into cordage, which woods burn hottest and longest. A flash of red feathers arcs above you, a parrot, its cry as harsh as it is beautiful. The navigator watches it disappear toward the ridge, then notes aloud that certain birds vanish when storms approach, retreating to sheltered valleys. Another compass, this one feathered. By midday, the heat folds itself around you, heavy and sticky. You return to camp with bundles of gathered food, breadfruit, small bananas, shellfish wrapped in damp leaves. The navigator adds a piece of driftwood to the fire, its resinous scent thickening the air. Someone cracks a green coconut and pours the water into a pot to simmer with the shellfish. The sound is a soft plink-plink as each piece drops in. The lull before the meal. The navigator kneels in the sand once more, this time not to draw, but to watch the shore. The tide is turning, and with it, the pattern of the lagoon changes. He points to the way the darker patches, coral heads, seem to move against the shimmering floor of the sea. Of course, they're not moving. It's the tide revealing them. But in that shift, he reads the speed of the water, the curve of the reef channels. It's the exact moment when the lagoon becomes passable for a deep-keeled canoe. You realize something. Then, a truth so simple, you almost miss it. A navigator doesn't just memorize the sea, it lives inside its memory, waking each day to refresh the details. This is why the camp feels temporary, even when it's comfortable. Every moment on land is in service to the next time he sets sail. As the sun edges westward, he finally leans back from his quiet vigil. The food is ready. The shellfish are tender, the breadfruit soft and fragrant. You eat with the crew, sitting cross-legged on mats, while the lagoon throws a shifting pattern of light across the sand. In the evening, the navigator takes you to the far side of the island, where the reef opens to the ocean. The horizon here is unbroken, a clean line between deep blue and sky. As the sun lowers, the first stars emerge, different from last night's, yet part of the same great net of light he carries in his head. He begins naming them again, voice low, each name a step on the invisible ladder that will one day lift the canoe back onto the open sea. And you sit beside him, letting the wind off the water fill your lungs, letting the names roll through your mind like a chant. You begin to sense the truth behind his constant watching. The sea is never the same twice, and to know it is to greet it anew every day. The night settles over the island like a warm quilt stitched with stars. You sit cross-legged beside the navigator, the sand cool beneath you, the surf's slow exhale filling the pauses in your thoughts. This time, he's not just naming the stars, he's telling you how they move, not in the impatient way a clock's hands jerk forward, but in a long, steady arc, predictable as a tide. His finger sweeps the sky, tracing paths invisible too. You, at first, is a bright one, low on the horizon. He says it will sink into the sea just before dawn. Another, climbing higher, will point toward an island chain so far away you'd never guess it existed without a guide like this. He speaks softly, as if afraid to scare them off, his tone half reverent, half matter-of-fact. Historians still argue whether the Polynesian star compass was rigidly standardized across islands or taught differently in each navigator's lineage. You get the feeling it's a bit of both. The names may change, but the relationship star to star, rising to wave, remains constant. The breeze tonight is gentler than the night before. You feel it brush your cheek, taste the salt in the air. The navigator closes his eyes, tilting his face into it, gauging the wind's origin without a glance at the sea. He hums under his breath, not a song you recognize, but a rhythm you can almost feel in your bones. It keeps time with the movement of the swell, a subtle pulse that your mind begins to sync with. Farther down the beach, the crew has built a small fire, its orange glow painting long, swaying shadows on the sand. A few of them sit in a loose circle, weaving repairs into fishing nets. The fine work is done by touch as much as sight, fingers moving like water over the cord, knotting, tightening, trimming the frayed ends. One of the younger sailors breaks away from the group and brings you a length of freshly knotted line. He gestures for you to try. Your first attempt is clumsy, too tight, then too loose, and the cord kinks under your fingers. He grins without malice, redoing it in 3 easy motions, then handing it back for you to try again. Slowly, your hands find the rhythm. The net grows by a few inches, and so does your quiet confidence. The navigator has been watching. Without a word, he gestures for you to follow him back to the water's edge. The tide is on its way in now, each wave climbing a little higher on the sand. He points to the dark patches offshore, the same coral heads you saw revealed earlier. Now, they've disappeared again beneath the tide. This, he says, is why knowing your reefs is as important as knowing your stars. You might have the perfect bearing to your destination, but misjudge the reef channel by a few feet, and you'll be counting splinters in the hull. He asks you to close your eyes. You obey, half curious, half skeptical. Then he takes your hands and places them in the shallow surf, palms facing down. The first wave is small, lifting your hands just a fraction before sliding away. The second is larger, its force more forward, then upward. He tells you to remember that feeling, the difference between a following swell and a crossing swell. You keep your eyes closed, letting each wave tell its story. Some arrive with a lazy push, others with a quick slap, and you begin to sense their direction even without looking. When you open your eyes again, he nods once. That, he says, is the beginning of reading the ocean at night, when your eyes can't help you and you must rely on the language of touch. Back at the fire, the crew shares a pot of fish stew. The broth is rich and briny, the fish flaking apart under your spoon. The navigator takes only a small portion, eating slowly. He seems to live half in the present moment, half in some invisible future crossing. Later, as the fire burns low, the navigator leads you a little inland to a sheltered spot where the wind barely stirs the palm fronds. He points upward again. Between two bright stars, there's a fainter one, barely visible, but he watches it with an unusual attention. That star, he explains, is a messenger. When it rises just so in the pre-dawn hours, it signals the shift in seasonal winds. This is the kind of detail that can make the difference between a smooth voyage and days of struggling against the weather. Historians still debate whether such minute celestial markers were universally known among voyagers or closely guarded by master navigators. You suspect the latter knowledge like this isn't handed out with the fishing nets. You lie back on the sand, looking up at the vast dome overhead. The stars seem brighter now, sharper, as if your eyes have finally adjusted to their company. You can almost believe they're leaning closer, whispering their secrets. The navigator stays beside you, silent, letting the night do its teaching. Somewhere beyond the reef, you hear the deeper crash of a swell breaking. Between those booms, the smaller shore waves answer like echoes in a long conversation. The fire down the beach pops softly as a log shifts, and a burst of sparks swirls upward, briefly joining the stars before fading into the dark. The navigator murmurs something in his own tongue. It's a phrase that sounds both like a farewell and a promise. Then he closes his eyes, head tipped back, as if aligning himself to an invisible grid only he can see. You get the feeling he's still sailing, even here on the sand. And, in a strange way, so are you. The first light of dawn drips into the world like water from a leaf, slow, silver, and almost shy. You stir awake on the sand, your blanket damp with sea breeze, your ears already tuned to the constant hush and pull of the tide. Somewhere nearby, the navigator is already awake, crouched low at the shoreline with his hands resting on his knees, watching the water like it's a living map that changes every minute. You pad over quietly, his feet crunching softly in the damp sand. He glances up once, gives a small nod, and points to the way the waves are folding in on themselves just beyond the reef. It's not dramatic, no crashing spray, no roaring breaker, just a subtle shift in where the crests lean and dissolve. That tilt tells him something important. A distant wind has changed direction. You would never have noticed. He picks up a palm frond rib and begins to draw in the sand. It starts as a wobbly circle at the horizon, then marks where the sun will rise today. From that point, he sketches lines like a compass rose, showing where swells intersect, where stars will fall later tonight. It's a chart, but not the kind you'd roll up and keep in a tube. It lives only in his head and in the living ocean. Historians still argue whether ancient Polynesian navigators passed down fixed master charts, or if every voyage began with a new, fluid understanding of conditions. Looking at him now, bent over the sand with his brow furrowed, you think the truth is somewhere between? A navigator's wisdom is part inheritance, part improvisation. The wind freshens just enough to lift a few strands of your hair. He rises, scanning the distant line where the pale sky meets the darker sea. His eyes narrow, not in worry, but in focus. Somewhere out there, unseen, is your imagined destination. For him, it's as real as the canoe that waits pulled up above the tide line. A few other sailors wander down, rubbing sleep from their eyes. One carries a small bundle of sticks bound with twine. Today's cooking fire. Another hums a tune under his breath, the kind of melody that sounds like it's been looping for centuries. Get yourself joining in, low at first, like your voice is testing the water. Breakfast is simple: grilled fish, warm breadfruit, a handful of coconut slices. The navigator eats slowly, as always, eyes occasionally lifting to check the light, the cloud edges, the way the seabirds tilt as they ride the air. Even the birds are part of his map. When a flock sweeps low, heading toward a particular point on the horizon, he tilts his head slightly, acknowledging a fellow traveler's path. After the meal takes you to the canoe. It's not large by modern standards, but it feels sturdy, purposeful. The hull gleams faintly from the last oiling, and the lashings that hold the outrigger beam are tight, each not placed with care. He runs a hand along the edge, murmuring something under his breath, perhaps a blessing, perhaps just habit. He motions for you to step inside. The wood is warm under your feet, still holding yesterday's heat. The canoe rocks gently as you settle in, and for a moment you imagine setting off right now, chasing whatever horizon the navigator points to. Instead, he hands you a small carved stick and points toward the shallows. Your job, he says, is to prod the seabed ahead. It's not to push the canoe, not yet, but to feel. The stick bumps sand, then shell, then the soft give of weed. He explains in a low voice that the texture beneath the water tells you how close you are to channels, to hidden coral spines, to places safe enough to run a canoe, even in twilight. There's a rhythm to it. Dip, feel, lift. It's almost meditative. And with every push, you learn that the seafloor, like the stars, has its own quiet language. By mid-morning, the sun's higher, bright enough now to make the water's surface glitter. The navigator shades his eyes and squints toward the line, where the swell seems slightly different, a faint seam across the blue. K, he says, marks the place where two swell systems meet. The difference is subtle, like hearing two drummers play slightly out of sync. But once you see it, it's K, you can't unsee it. Historians still debate how far such visual cues could guide a canoe in open ocean without land in sight. The navigator doesn't seem interested in the debate. To him, it's as plain as reading the lines on your own hand. You return to shore before the heat grows thick. The crew hauls the canoe higher on the sand, its bow pointing toward the palms like a sleeping spear. The navigator squats in its shadow, running his palm over the sand drawing he made earlier. The rising sun has blurred it, smudging the lines, but he doesn't seem to mind. The knowledge is already safe where it belongs, back at the shelter. Someone passes around a gourd of cool water flavored faintly with pandan leaf. The shade is mottled here, sunlight slipping through palm fronds like gold dust. You sink onto a mat, listening to the slow conversation in the background, half about fishing, half about the old voyages no one has taken in a generation. And you realize something. This isn't just learning a skill. This is being welcomed into a rhythm, one where the morning tide, the midday swell, and the slow turning of the stars are not separate events, but threads in the same fabric. You've been holding the loose ends for days. Now, you're starting to feel them braid together. The navigator catches your eye, gives a small smile, and tilts his head toward the sea. Not yet, but soon. By the time midday presses down on the island, the heat feels like a heavy quilt draped over your shoulders. The palm leaves above you barely stir, and even the gulls seem to be taking a break from their endless commentary. Somewhere inland, a rooster crows late, either confused or stubborn. The navigator finds you in the shade, a half smile on his face as though he's caught you hiding from the sun. He beckons with a crooked finger and leads you to a sheltered cove on the far side of the beach. Here, the water is shallow and clear, the sand below painted with swaying fronds of sea RESS. He tells you to watch, not the surface, but the shapes beneath it. The fish darting in schools are not just food or tiny messengers. He points out how they cluster near certain channels at low tide, using them as highways. When you tilt your head just right, you can trace the same lines a navigator might when deciding where to enter or leave a reef in the deeper part of the cove. A dark shape glides a manta ray, its wings pulsing with lazy grace. The navigator murmurs that rays prefer certain currents, ones that bring plankton-rich water. That preference, in turn, tells a practiced eye something about where those currents originate and where they'll lead. Historians still argue whether such animal cues were critical for long voyages or simply reassuring signs that a navigator was on the right track. Here, it seems both. The manta isn't just a creature, it's a moving piece of the ocean's chart. You wade in up to your knees, feeling the silken push of the tide around your legs. The navigator picks up a thin branch and drops it into the water. You watch as it drifts, hesitates, then is pulled along an invisible seam. He explains this is how you can see where two currents meet, their energies folding into one another. Sometimes they carry you faster, sometimes they fight you. Hey, either way, you have to know what you're dealing with before you trust them. He gestures for you to try. You drop your own stick and squint as it bobs away. It drifts toward a patch of rippling water you hadn't noticed before, where the sea seems to shimmer differently. The navigator nods approvingly. You've found the split where the bay's outflow meets the incoming tide. As you stand there, something brushes your shin, a curious little fish. You flinch, and the navigator chuckles. The sea always notices you, he says, and you can't tell if he's being poetic or stating an actual fact. It's probably both. Back on the shore, he picks up a length of dry pandanus leaf and begins twisting it absent-mindedly. Soon, it becomes a neat cord, its fibers tight and even. He explains this is the same cordage used to lash the canoe's parts together, strong as any nail, but far more forgiving in the swell. You take a turn at twisting. Your first attempt is lumpy, uneven. Hey, just shrugs, says the sea will teach your fingers in time. Someone brings roasted bananas wrapped in leaves. You peel one, the hot fruit sweet and sticky, and watch as the navigator draws another sand map, this time marking the locations of islands you haven't even heard of. They seem impossibly far, yet his hand moves as though he's tracing the layout of his own home. Historians still debate whether Polynesian navigators memorized the exact positions of hundreds of islands or relied on patterns that would always lead them to land. But watching him work, you suspect it's not either or. It's both, and a web of fixed points and flowing pathways that he carries without ever needing ink or parchment. The heat eases slightly as afternoon drifts in, a breeze pushing the heavy air back toward the horizon. You wander down to the main beach again, where the canoe rests. A few crew members are checking the lashings, pressing their palms to the hull to feel for any looseness. They sing while they work, low rhythmic chants that seem to sync with the gentle slapping of the waves. You sit nearby, your feet buried in warm sand, and realize that all morning you've been surrounded by invisible maps, and fish and currents, and sand and sky, in the pull of the wind. You're starting to see them without trying, when the navigator glances over and sees you watching the horizon. He doesn't call you back. He just lets you sit there, looking, 'cause the first lesson of reading the ocean, you think, is learning to watch it until it starts talking back. And now, as the tide begins to shift again, you feel the faintest pulse beneath your feet, as if the whole sea has just taken a slow, deep breath. Late afternoon light stretches long across the beach, turning the foam at the shore into threads of molten gold. The canoe casts a dark shadow on the sand, and you can see each grain in high relief, as if the sun has decided to etch every detail before it slips away. The navigator is already at work again, crouched near the stern. It's fiddling with something you can't quite see. When you step closer, you realize he's adjusting the steering, or a massive wooden blade polished to a soft sheen by years of salt water and sun. Hey, leans it against the canoe and gestures for you to hold it. You're surprised by its weight. It's less like holding an oar and more like holding the handle of a door that decides whether you'll live or drift forever. He explains that in the open ocean, steering isn't about brute force. It's about small, precise nudges, like coaxing a stubborn cat rather than dragging a dog on a leash. Historians still argue whether Polynesian voyages relied more on wind or current for navigation, but he seems to think the real trick was marrying both with an oar's quiet authority. Gust of wind tosses your hair, and the navigator's eyes flick toward the horizon. He tilts his chin toward a distant smear of cloud, barely visible against the deepening blue. Tomorrow, he says simply, and you somehow understand he means that's when you'll leave. The sea has its own calendar, and you've just been penciled in. You follow him inland toward the village, where preparations are already humming. Women plait thick ropes from coconut fiber, their hands a blur of muscle memory. Nearby, a man shaves thin strips from a piece of breadfruit wood, shaping them into wedges that will later tighten the canoe's lashings. Even the children have jobs, ferrying water in gourds, fetching fresh leaves for wrapping provisions. The air smells faintly of smoke and taro steaming in earth ovens. Someone has set a pot of fish to simmer with seawater, the scent mingling with the briny breeze. You pass a hut where a small group is repairing sails. The canvas is woven from pandanus leaves, each strip painstakingly dried, softened, and knotted. You run your fingers along the surface. It's rougher than cloth, yet light enough to catch even a shy wind. The navigator shows you the sail's shape, crab claw, wide at the base and tapering sharply at the top. He tells you it's not just for catching wind, it's for balancing the canoe's soul. It's too much wind in the wrong angle, and the whole thing fights you. It's just enough, and the sea feels like it's carrying you in its palm. He points toward a rack where several gourds hang drying in the sun. These, he explains, will hold fresh water for the voyage. You imagine the crew rationing sips from them days out at sea, the weight of each drop measured like treasure. You ask how long they can go without fresh water, and he just shrugs. Long enough if they have to, not long enough if they guess wrong. Comforting. Historians still debate the maximum range of Polynesian voyages without resupply. Some say they could stretch weeks. Others believe they relied on chain islands and rain collection to keep going. The navigator seems unconcerned by either theory. He trusts the rhythm of his people, the way they've timed their journeys for centuries. As the sun lowers, shadows spill across the village like ink. The navigator leads you to a small clearing where a circle of stones surrounds a shallow pit. Here, he says, they'll prepare a ceremonial meal before departure. It's less about superstition and more about honoring the balance between land and sea. You get the feeling that both expect their due. You sit with him on a log, watching as the sky bruises into twilight. A thin crescent moon emerges, and he traces its arc with his finger. "That's your clock," he murmurs. You glance at the horizon. The ocean already mirrors the darkening sky, save for a faint silver road where the moon's reflection cuts across it. The breeze picks up. It's cooler now, carrying the rustle of palm fronds and the occasional call of a night heron. Somewhere, A fire cracks. Sparks leap upward and vanish into the deepening blue, like tiny stars that got lost on their way. The navigator's voice is low, almost part of the wind. He talks about the first voyages he took as a boy, clinging to the gunwale in seas that looked like mountains, watching the sky roll and tilt until it felt like the world itself might spill over. He laughs softly, remembering the sickness that bent him double. But then his face shifts, turning serious. The sea teaches, he says. She is patient, and she never forgets if you are rude. You think about that as the night wraps itself around the island. The canoe waits on the beach, its shape a dark silhouette against the foam. Tomorrow, it will lift into the open sea. Tonight, it rests. You head back toward your hut, the sand cool beneath your feet, the air smelling faintly of salt and smoke. Somewhere far out in the black water, a wave breaks, its sound rolling toward you like the slow breath of something vast and ancient. The night deepens, and with it comes a hush so complete you can hear your own thoughts stretching out into the dark. The sea has softened to a gentle murmur, as if it, too, is resting before the work ahead. You lie in your hut, half dozing, but the quiet doesn't last. Somewhere outside, faint singing begins, a slow, looping chant that threads through the stillness like smoke. Curiosity wins over sleep. You step outside to find a small group gathered near the shore, illuminated by a fire no bigger than a cooking pit. Their voices weave together in a melody that feels older than the island itself, steady and low, the kind of song you could row to for hours without noticing the time. The navigator sits among them, eyes half closed, tapping the side of a wooden bowl in rhythm. He beckons you closer. For the wind, he says, patting the sand beside him. The song, he explains, is part memory aid, part gift. The verses are not about wind in the abstract. They're specific, describing the way certain breezes smell, the way they feel on your face, the kind of ripples they draw across the ocean's surface. Historians still argue whether such chants were purely functional navigation tools or if they carried ritual weight, meant to please the forces that grant safe passage. Here, it seems obvious they are both. One verse speaks of the smiling wind, warm and scented, faintly, of flowers. That comes just before sunrise. Another warns of the restless brother, a gusty, irregular wind that arrives in the late afternoon and can shift without notice. You realize these aren't just poetic, they're maps you can hear. Someone hands you a calabash bowl of water. It's cool against your palms, tasting faintly of the smoke from the fire. The navigator gestures for you to sip slowly. Drink like you're at sea, he says with a grin. You oblige, taking tiny mouthfuls, imagining yourself surrounded by nothing but blue. You suddenly understand why they treat water like a treasure. As the song goes on, one of the elders picks up a small bundle wrapped in leaves. She unwraps it to reveal shells, cowries, conchs, and a few smooth, flat discs. She arranges them in the sand in strange arcs and clusters, each group a reminder of a specific star path or island chain. It's a portable chart, one that doesn't rely on paper or ink. You watch as she traces a finger from one shell to another, telling a story about a journey her grandfather made long before she was born. The navigator leans close. These shells, he whispers, therefore teaching the young, but once. You know the sea, you keep the map here. He taps the side of his head, and here, he taps his chest. The fire crackles, a palm frond shifts in the breeze, and for a moment you swear the entire island is leaning in to listen. You feel yourself learning without quite trying the melody, the scent cues, the constellation shapes, all settling into some quiet corner of your brain. It's oddly reassuring, like someone has just handed you a key you didn't know you needed. A sudden laugh ripples through the group as a boy, no older than 12, tries to repeat one of the verses, but muddles the words, accidentally describing. A wind is smelling of boiled fish. The elders chuckle, shaking their heads, and correct him gently. You can see that even the mistakes are part of the learning. The navigator tells you that this is the last night for singing before departure. Tomorrow, there will be no chance on the water, only the hiss of the bow slicing through waves, though, creak of lashings, and the wind itself whispering in your ears. The sea is noisy in her own way, but she prefers her own voice once the voyage begins. You sit a while longer, letting the music and the salt sweet air sink into you. The stars have wheeled farther west now, and a thin streak of silver shows, where the moon is climbing higher. The tide is slipping away, leaving the canoe perched a little higher on the sand. It looks patient, but also expectant, like a runner waiting for the starting horn. Eventually, the fire burns low, and the singers drift away in twos and threes. You follow the navigator back toward the huts, the cool sand pressing between your toes. The village has gone quiet again, save for the soft knock of waves and the occasional thud of a coconut dropping somewhere in the dark dot. As you settle back inside your hut, you catch the faintest trace of the chant still looping in your mind. You hum it under your breath without meaning to, the syllables strange but soothing. You have no idea if you'll remember the exact words in the morning, but something tells you you'll remember the feeling, and maybe, if you're lucky, the winds will remember you too. The morning wakes you gently, with the pale light spilling across the woven mat where you slept. There's no rooster's crow here, it's number clanging alarm, just a distant hush of waves, and the faint shuffle of feet outside as the village stirs. You stretch, feeling the coolness of the air before the sun takes full command. And you know today is not just another morning. This is the morning the canoe leaves. Stepping outside, you see the navigator already at the shore, knee-deep in water, checking the lashings along the outrigger. His movements are unhurried, almost ceremonial, but every tug and knot matters. The hull is dark and damp from the night's dew, and the long, curved prow seems to point at some invisible target beyond the horizon. A small group gathers nearby, carrying bundles of dried fish, taro wrapped in leaves, gourds of water. You're handed a bundle of your own, the weight unfamiliar but reassuring provisions for days or even weeks, depending on what the ocean decides. Historians still argue whether these voyages were as meticulously planned as they seem, or whether they relied more on the navigator's ability to adapt in real time. Watching now, you suspect it's both careful preparation wrapped around a willingness to improvise. The air has that crisp saltiness you only get in the early morning, when the wind hasn't yet been warmed by the day. You can taste it on your lips. Somewhere inland, someone beats a drum in a slow, steady rhythm, not loud enough to command, but enough to set a pace for the loading and final checks. The navigator motions you over and points toward the eastern horizon. The sun is a faint smear of gold there, just lifting above the sea. "She'll be with us today," he says simply. You understand he's not talking about a person, but about the wind, a morning land breeze that will push you gently out to sea before giving way to the ocean's own breath later in the day. Nearby, two boys wrestle a tightly rolled mat of pandanus leaves onto the deck, untying it to reveal a sail woven in a chevron pattern. The navigator explains, in that casual way people use when they've known something forever, that the pattern isn't just for strength, it channels wind in a way that makes the canoe more responsive. You run your fingers along the weave, feeling the slight ridges where the fibers overlap. It's not unlike running your hands over a map, okay? Each bump telling a part of the story. A woman approaches with a bundle wrapped in tapa cloth and hands it to the navigator. He unwraps it carefully, revealing a small carved figure, smooth, dark, and polished by years of handling. It's the voyage's guardian, placed at the bow to keep watch. Some say these figures are symbolic, could swear they've seen them turn the luck of a journey. You don't question it. Out there, luck is as real as the wind and waves. The last of the supplies are stowed. Baskets of breadfruit, coils of fishing line, spare lashings. You notice the careful balance. Heavy items, low and central. Lighter ones, tucked under the outriggers, crossbeams. Even here, the canoe is a kind of living map. Its layout, telling you how the journey should flow. The navigator gathers. Everyone close for a few final words. His voice is low, but you catch certain phrases. The deep path. Listen to the waves. The stars will tell. He says something that makes the group laugh. You'd think it's about how nobody should try to out-sing the wind. And then, just like that, the meeting breaks. You wade into the shallows with the others, the cool water swirling around your calves. The canoe is eased forward, its hull sliding over the sand with a satisfying hush. There's a moment where the weight shifts and it begins to float, buoyant and eager, like a bird testing its wings. You climb aboard, feeling the give of the lashings beneath your feet. Take your place along the hull. From here, the village looks both close and impossibly far. The thatched roofs, the thin columns of smoke from breakfast fires, the figures standing at the edge of the sand, watching you go. You wonder how many of them have stood here before, seeing someone off into the unknown, wondering when or if they'll return. The paddle strokes begin slowly, more to steer than to propel. The sail is still furled, waiting for the right moment. The navigator stands at the stern, eyes scanning the water ahead, the set of the outrigger. The way the bow meets the small morning chop. He makes a tiny hand signal, and the sail unfurls with a soft rush. It catches instantly, billowing out with a curve as perfect as a held breath. The canoe leans slightly, finding her balance. The shore begins to drift backward, the water beneath you deepening in color, from pale green to the first hints of blue. There's no grand farewell, no trumpet of departure, just a quiet pull of the ocean taking you in, the navigator's gaze fixed ahead, and the rhythm of the paddles folding into the sound of the wind. You glance back once more. The village is already shrinking, its shapes blending into the green of the island. Ahead, the horizon stretches wide and empty, but somehow, you know, it isn't empty at all. It's just waiting for you to learn how to read it. The navigator catches your eye, gives a half smile, and points forward. Now, he says, you begin to see. The canoe rides the morning swell with the kind of ease you can only get when both boat and crew know their place on the water. The air feels different already, cooler, more open, with a faint hum as the sail pulls you further from land. You sit low near the outrigger, watching how it rises and dips against the waves like a steady heartbeat. The navigator stands barefoot at the stern, toes gripping the smooth timber as though the canoe is an extension of himself. His gaze is never fixed for long, sweeps the horizon, dips to the waterline, then arcs upward toward the pale sky. You realize he's constantly checking, constantly confirming, not in a panicked way, but with the calm assurance of someone reading a familiar book. You lean forward, trying to see what he sees. He points to the faintest smudge on the water. Ahead. At first, it's just a darker patch among the silver-blue ripples. Reflected sky, he murmurs. Cloud shadow from far away. It's not just any cloud. It's a kind that clings to islands, feeding off the moisture rising from trees and soil. Historians still argue whether early navigators could truly detect land this way at great distances, or if it was more of a confirmation than a discovery. Here, the smudge feels almost like a whisper from the horizon, hinting at something unseen down below. The waves run in long, unbroken lines. You've heard before about reading the swell, but this is your first time seeing it. The navigator crouches and traces a finger along the air, mimicking the invisible ridges beneath you. These, he says, are from far storms. travel days, sometimes weeks, without breaking. You test the feeling yourself, closing your eyes, letting the roll of the canoe tell you the direction. It's subtle, like trying to sense the tilt of a floor by shifting your weight. But after a while, you think you can feel the main swell pushing from the east, a second, smaller pulse running diagonally across it. He explains that each swell is like a road, some wide and smooth, others narrow and tricky, and that a navigator remembers which ones lead toward certain islands. The canoe rides not just one, but several roads at once, like crossing a city of moving streets. And if one current dies away, another will carry you. It's an art that depends on memory, patience, and trust. Mid-morning, the sail is adjusted, slightly shifting your angle to catch the faint trade wind. You notice how every movement on the canoe has purpose. Someone adjusts a lashing, not because it's loose, but because it might become loose in an hour. Another shifts a basket just a handspan to even the balance. You begin to understand why the preparation was so exact out here. Tiny adjustments make the difference between a smooth ride and a stubborn fight with the sea. The navigator calls. You two stand beside him and points toward a line of faint, low clouds stacked along the horizon. There, he says, you see the atoll clouds? It's flat bottom, high top. They sit over the lagoon. You can't help but squint. It's far too subtle for your untrained eyes. But you nod anyway, feeling the strange mix of humility and awe that comes with realizing just how much is written in the sky. A flying fish bursts from the water nearby, gliding in a shimmering arc before slipping back under with barely a ripple. The crew barely glances at it, but you feel the urge to laugh. Here's proof that the ocean has its own playful streak. The navigator catches your smile and shrugs. They tell you the sea is healthy. Good omen. You're not sure if he believes it in the mystical sense, but it's clear he's cataloging it just as he catalogs the swells and the clouds by midday. The sun burns high overhead, and the sail shadow becomes a prized patch of shade. A few crew members doze against the bundles of provisions, their breathing in sync with the gentle slap of water against the hull. You find yourself lulled by the rhythm, the vast openness no longer intimidating but strangely comforting. It's like the sea has accepted you, for now. The navigator leans close and points toward the north. The swell there, he explains, is shifting a sign of distant weather. We will keep her on the eastern road, he says. You can't see the change, but you can feel his decision ripple through the crew. The sail is trimmed again. The outrigger dips deeper, and the canoe lengthens her stride. Somewhere, far ahead, perhaps still beyond sight, lies the destination, not a pin on a map, but a presence growing clearer in the navigator's mind. Every swell, every cloud, every gleam of light on the water is part of that presence. To you, the ocean still looks like an endless sheet of shifting blue. To him, it's a living chart, full of signs and signals. The afternoon heat presses down, but the air feels alive with motion. The navigator's hand never leaves the tiller. His eyes never stop reading. You begin to wonder if this is what literacy once felt like to someone first learning letters, the moment when meaningless marks become words, and words become stories. He catches you staring and smiles. You will see it too, he says. Not today, but you will. And you believe him. The afternoon light softens into something warmer, like honey poured over the horizon. The swell has steadied, the wind easing into a constant low sigh that fills the sail just enough to keep your pace. You can smell the faint brine of open ocean mingling with the resin of the canoe's lashings. Sun-warmed and salt-stiff, the navigator hasn't stopped scanning. Even now, as the air grows gentler, his attention sweeps from sky to sea to sky again. He tells you this is when mistakes are most likely, when the sea feels too easy and the wind too kind. It's like when a friend suddenly gets too quiet, he says with a sly grin. When you watch them most, you settle beside the outrigger, dangling your hand into the cool water. The swells roll under you like the slow breathing of some enormous creature. Now and then, a burst of foam licks at your wrist. The navigator notices where your gaze falls and explains how the foam sometimes rides at an angle to the main swell, revealing hidden currents below. Historians still argue whether early navigators could detect these microcurrents reliably, or whether it was more an art than a science. But watching him now, you sense he's not just theorizing, he's listening to something you can't quite hear. A seabird appears, low on the horizon, skimming the waves. Then another, and another. They cut across your bow before veering, away toward the west. The navigator's tone changes slightly, taking on that quiet excitement you've heard before. Birds returning to roost, he says, means land is not far. You glance at the horizon. It still looks empty, but you've learned enough not to doubt him. Late in the day, clouds begin to pile up low in the distance. They have that curious flat-bottomed shape again, the one he called atoll clouds. You try to remember his earlier lesson, tracing their tops with your eyes, searching for the faint shimmer of light he swore was there. You don't see it, not yet, but you tell yourself you will. The crew begins to prepare without being told. Lines are coiled, baskets shifted again, the water gourd passed from hand to hand for a measured sip. The navigator adjusts the sail to ease your course toward the west, catching a slightly stiffer wind. It's not dramatic, but it feels like the beginning of something. A quiet tightening of focus. A pod of dolphins appears off your port side, their backs slick and dark against the fading sun. They leap in twos and threes, arcing so close you can hear the splash when they re-enter. You laugh, despite yourself. It's hard not to. The navigator glances at them, but doesn't break his rhythm. They follow us for the same reason we follow the swell, he says. They know where it leads. Whether he means it literally or as a sly metaphor, you can't tell. The light deepens into a gold-red glow that spills across the water. Shadows grow long along the sail, painting it with streaks of amber. The ocean seems to stretch endlessly in all directions, yet somehow it feels smaller now, as if the path you're on has narrowed into a single, visible line. The navigator steps to the outrigger and crouches low, running his fingertips along the surface of the sea. You watch him close his eyes, feeling rather than seeing. The swell is splitting, he says softly. One road is turning north. We stay with the west road. You don't argue. You've stopped needing proof for his choices. As the sun kisses the horizon, the colors shift again, gold melting to crimson, crimson to deep purple. The sail catches the last of the light, glowing briefly before slipping into shadow. The crew moves with an unhurried efficiency, readying the canoe for night sailing. Torches are lit, casting small halos of orange that sway with the boats. Movement out here. Dusk isn't a slow fade, it's a curtain drop. One moment you're surrounded by color. The next, the stars blink awake overhead, sharp and immediate. Tilt your head back, startled by their brightness. It's as if someone has scattered powdered sugar across black velvet. The navigator is already aligning them in his mind, matching each cluster to the memory roads of swells and clouds. The sea breathes beneath you. Dark now, but still legible to him, like ink on parchment. And, for the first time, you begin to feel that maybe, just maybe, you could learn to read it too. Night has fully taken the ocean now. The black water stretches without edge, yet your world feels smaller. A snug circle of canoe, crew, and the dome of stars above. The torches cast a warm, trembling light on the navigator's face, tracing the lines worn there by sun, salt, and years of listening to the sea. His eyes never settle for long. They flit from horizon to sky, from sail to swell, as if he's conducting a silent orchestra only he can hear. The air has cooled, but it carries a quiet energy. The swell is steady beneath you, a deep and deliberate rhythm. Every so often, the canoe rises and falls in a way that makes you think of breathing, the ocean's own inhale and exhale. You match your breath to it without even realizing, feeling yourself drawn into the same slow tempo. The navigator points to a small cluster of stars low on the horizon. He names them in his own tongue, the syllables soft but certain. You've heard these names before, scattered through earlier conversations, but now they carry weight. That one tells us west, he murmurs. That one warns of the south wind. You can't see the warnings, but you nod, letting his certainty wash over you. Historians still argue whether early navigators mapped every star with precision or followed a more intuitive path, blending learned patterns with a lifetime's worth of instinct. Watching him now, you suspect it's both a marriage of chart and feeling, numbers and muscle memory. The crew moves almost silently, adjusting lines, shifting their weight when the swell suggested. Even in the dark, there's a strange visibility here, not of sight, but of presence. You feel the closeness of the others, the quiet cooperation that hums through every gesture. It's the kind of teamwork that doesn't need speaking. You dip your hand into the night water. It's cooler than before, and when you lift your fingers, they glisten with flecks of light, tiny bioluminescent sparks that flash once and vanish. The navigator catches your glance and grins. The ocean stars, he says. They read the water too. Far ahead, the clouds have thinned, and the line of the horizon shimmers faintly. You know better than to trust your eyes, yet, but your heart gives a small leap all the same. Maybe land. Maybe just the sea playing tricks. Out here, the difference doesn't matter tonight. The stars have taken over as guides, their points sharp against the velvet black. The canoe slides forward, propelled by the quiet push of the swell, the patient pull of tradition. It's good to cut. You think of all the journeys made before this one, hundreds, thousands, each following the same invisible paths across the same unmarked ocean. The thought is humbling, but also comforting, and slowly, with the rocking of the boat and the hush of the water, your own mind begins to drift. The air is soft now, the kind that invites your shoulders to release the last of the day's tension. The stars are steady overhead, their faint twinkle reminder that everything is in motion, even the things that seem still. The canoe moves with the ocean's breathing, a cradle rocking you into calm. You feel the wood beneath your hands, smooth from years of salt and sun, warm from the heat stored through the day. The quiet laughter of the crew has faded into an occasional murmur, as gentle as the brush of water against the hull. Somewhere in the dark, a seabird calls once, then settles again into silence. The navigator sits near the bow, gaze fixed somewhere. You can't follow, yet the set of his shoulders tells you all you need to know. The course is sure, the path is clear, and nothing in this moment demands urgency. You breathe deeper, slower, letting that certainty sink into you. The water glides past, carrying you forward without effort. Each swell lifts you just enough to remind you that you're part of something vast but benevolent. Your eyelids grow heavier with each rise and fall. The sound of the ocean folds around you like a blanket, steady, predictable, safe. Out here, time softens. The worries of your own world feel far away, shrunk down to something small and harmless. You could drift like this forever, following the quiet pool of stars, the slow rhythm of the swell. And so, you let go. You let the night hold you, let the sea's breathing carry you deeper into rest, knowing the journey continues, and you are exactly where you need to be. Sweet dreams.